So we're going to just have 10 minutes of questions. I think I'm going to take them singly because it's nice to hear as much as possible from James. Michael may want to chip in as well at some point. Has someone got the mic over there? Excellent. Who would like to be the first person to put a question? I'm going to look around. I am going to look to see if there's slightly more women than there were the last time we did this, but I'm going to start with this gentleman over here, if that's okay. Thanks very much. And we'll just do them one at a time, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's just a question for James. How do we avoid the sort of unintended consequences? Because we're talking about legislation to encourage electric cars, but as we all know, a lot of the minerals that go into the batteries for electric cars, like coltan, are pulled out of places like Congo, and are pretty much an environmental disaster for that country, not to mention the conflict and all the millions of people that have been displaced. So how do we make sure that making our own countries greener isn't destroying large swathes of Africa?
It's a very important question that I don't think there's yet a complete answer to. And it needs to be something we focus on very carefully. I mean, in the case of battery technology, while I'm not an expert, I do follow it with great enthusiasm. And there are a variety of technologies that are being worked on, and here's where research comes into it. A variety of technologies that are being worked on which don't rely on some of these rare earths that are in the Congo and other places. So technology can solve that problem, I believe, but it needs support. And Michael, you're the technology man.
No, so what you're talking about, I think, is cobalt, particularly from the Congo, and it is a very a real and a very substantial problem that it's being mined in such appalling circumstances, and it does need work. Now, technologically, the battery industry is innovating to reduce the amount of cobalt. I mean, the other things, like lithium and so on, they're not nearly as restricted. It's stuff essentially out of the DRC that's the big problem. There needs to be investment in supply chains. We've seen this with the clothing industry. Had an appalling supply chain and is cleaning it up. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But that sort of work has to happen in addition to technological innovation. There's also, I have to be a bit careful how I phrase it, but you have to also keep in perspective the vast environmental damage that's caused by the current setup. It's not like we're starting with a clean sheet and everything's great, and now the question is, do we do some things that will have some impact around the world? The answer is, there's probably no solution that doesn't have some challenges associated with it. If there is, I'd love to hear, because I haven't seen it. So I think it requires management, but it is a largely manageable issue. But it requires management. I'm not going to say it doesn't.
The lady just here, please.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Vicky Hurd from Sustain. Lots and lots of very good and positive, interesting things there. Thank you for that. I did want to ask about the energy mix in terms of particularly when it's land-based. Crops used for bioenergy are a real problem globally. We all know about palm oil, but there are others. And I'm just interested to know how you would get the UK government to play its role in organising our land use globally. As Ruth talked about, our global land take is huge. What could we do? What are the solutions that UK, now we're moving out of the EU renewable directives, etc. What are we going to do in the UK to make sure that doesn't go down that route further? Because we're running out of land and we need it for food.
Well, and the world is running out of land. And E.O. Wilson, the great American biologist, says that we actually need to preserve half the world's surface wild if humanity is going to thrive, in the next couple of thousand years. And at the moment, we take more than 60% of the productive capacity of the planet. So we're very, very, very far from doing that. One of the things I would do is to make sure that we walk away from the EU's way of looking at biomass. The EU has a false accounting system that assumes that all biomass is energy neutral and CO2 neutral, that is, and it's not. So what you have is a situation in which virgin forests are being cut down, pelletized, shipped to Drax and burned in a coal plant, while the EU is patting itself on the back, saying it has a CO2 neutral or negative contribution. So the first is changing the accounting rules on biomass, really, and that takes care of a great deal of it, I think.
I can't resist adding that there is now a kind of absolute joining together of the agenda around the protection of the natural environment and our efforts to address climate change. Because if we can't find ways of growing enough food and preserving what's left of our natural ecosystems and preserving our biological climate stocks, we can't solve any of the problems we're talking about. Now, the UK is in a position where it is radically reforming its own land use sector. If it gets all of those things right about international diplomacy and relationships on trade, it can use that transformation to drive a different approach to land at the global level. But you do need that whole picture to be right. My plea in the middle of that is we have to start by ending the conversion of what's left of the world's natural, carbon-rich and wildlife-rich ecosystems. That is the foundational approach to everything that we should be doing on a global level. Sorry, I'm a moderator. I shouldn't have used that opportunity.
I'd go further. I mean, we clearly need to start reforesting. Well, not just start, we are reforesting. If you actually look at the statistics, we are reforesting. There is another piece to this. We need to intensify the agriculture that in those areas that are then heavily impacted. I'm sorry, but we need to get higher yields, whatever that takes. I'm going to get thumped if I go any further down that route, but we all know what we're talking about. But also, we've got to be very, and I agree about, I don't know about virgin rainforest being cut down and used in Drax, and I think that maybe Drax might disagree with. But
not rainforest, but it is actually large tracts of virgin.
But I'm not going to defend.
Forest,
I'm not going to defend the rules because I agree they need we need to get that accounting right. But we also, the caution is that we need to do it in the knowledge that solving our heating challenge is difficult. We can't pretend just because I showed some charts showing solar power going up and wind going up and all the rest of it. The UK's heating load, the peak heating load, is 6 times our electrical load. 6 times. If you think that's going to go electric, you have to build an electrical system, as things stand, that is 6 times as big, which is not going to happen. So we need to insulate. We need to get really serious about energy efficiency, energy efficient buildings, new build, absolutely, tomorrow please, and then deep renovations also. The rest is frankly noise. But then we have to have a solution for heat, which probably will be partly electric, but partly not. Right? So that once we've got the accounting standards right for the impact of biofuels, biomass, biogas, hopefully that will still allow us to do some of that. Otherwise, I think we're going to be we're going to have some cold homes.
Okay. Ding ding. Alex, can I have one more? One more question? Yes. I'm going to have this gentleman here, if that's okay.
Benjamin Bilski with Pericles Foundation. Thank you for a very interesting panel. My question relates to automotive transport, which for a very long time it had a monopoly of oil, which inflated, in a way, overpriced oil. The transition to electricity and phasing out of carbon fuel is, of course, a very good big macro trend. But you didn't mention a measure that is in between, which is fuel flexibility, that can be used for cars by minor adjustments, by introducing ethanol, methanol, biofuel, natural gas, and electricity as a mix when different energy sources are competing with each other.
We've got 1 second.
Yeah.
So
the good systems that the Chinese and the Californians have brought in account for all of this. Yes. So when I was advocating those systems, it actually takes account of all of this.
One sentence from Michael, and then we need to start.
I would say, see the earlier discussion about correctly accounting for the land use and the biomass. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with those. It works very nicely, cost effectively, environmentally acceptably in Brazil, if it's done right, which it's often not.
And I'm just going to repeat the fact that there's a finite amount of land and we have some very, very tough choices to decide about what we're going to do with it in those circumstances. Sorry that we weren't able to have a longer conversation, but that was a fantastic, very rich discussion. Can we say thank you to James and Michael, if that's okay?